The Canadian Blood Services is now asking Health Canada to remove a ban that did not allow gay and bisexual men, as well as some other members of the LGBTQ2S+, to donate blood. Instead, Canadian Blood Services would ask all donors, regardless of their sexual orientation, if they've engaged in higher-risk sexual activities. The move is one that the organization says would allow more equity for donors while ensuring a safe blood supply. Joining us live to talk about the possible change in the organization's policy is the executive director of the Alliance for South Asian AIDS Prevention, Pranay Anand, along with the OHTN Endgame Chair in Gay and Bisexual Men's Health, David Brennan. Both of you, thanks for joining us tonight. First to you, David, this is a policy that's had a long and controversial history with the Canadian Blood Services. What do you think this application that the organization has submitted means for the LGBTQ2S+ community?
Well, I think it's fantastic news, Mark. Thank you. I am, have long been an advocate for ensuring that the blood donation policy reflects science and not bias. And this application is really about making sure that when we're looking at safety of the blood supply, which is, of course, very critical, that we're doing it from an evidence-based perspective. And there's lots of evidence now gathered by numerous researchers around the globe, but also particularly here in Canada, funded actually through the Canadian Blood Services, that is beginning to show that there's really no potential risk of HIV, an increase in risk of HIV being put into the blood supply through this change in policy. As you probably know, they've made a couple of changes in the policy over the last few years, and that has not in any way increase any potential risk. So this is the next best step. It's not about identifying a group of people like gay men. It's about identifying particular behaviors and what it means in relationship to HIV risk.
And Pranay, I know the change would still allow the organization to ask donors if they've engaged in, quote, higher risk sexual activities. Do you think this move goes far enough in representing the people impacted?
I think it does, because as we've talked about so many times, it was specifically targeting gay men and just saying, okay, because you are a man and you're having sex with men, you're automatically banned from donating blood, right? So, and then we went through these incremental steps towards making policy changes. And finally, it's not about identity as so-and-so, that it doesn't disallow an entire group of people to become ineligible to donate blood. And it is more about behavior. It's more about the risks that people might be, certain other criteria just based not on your identity and not who you are. And so I think that is what's most important about it.
And David, should the move have happened sooner in terms of a timeline here?
It's hard for me to say. I wish it had happened sooner, quite frankly. The evidence behind all this could have been gathered sooner and could have been done sooner. But it's happening when it's happening. I appreciate that there are people at CBS who are really trying to ensure that this is an evidence-based policy. That is not to say that the long-standing policy hasn't had a tremendous negative stigma on gay men, in particular, also on trans people. This is not even to mention kind of a whole history of the way that racialized people, particularly Black and Indigenous people, have been excluded in the history of Canada from donating blood. But like any institution, Canadian Blood Services has had to kind of look closely at their own policies, and they'll need to do some work here on relationship repair with the gay community. There are lots of gay men who are at absolutely zero risk of HIV transmission who've not been able to give blood over the years, myself included. Just because I have a partner or a husband, does that mean I can't give blood? That doesn't make any sense, right? Especially if the blood is already being tested. So there are lots of ways in which the policies have been are really perceived as very discriminatory over the years. And so this is, I think, a move to kind of strike down at that kind of built-in systemic homophobia that occurs in the context of blood donation.
And Pranay, I know this is something that has a long controversial history, but take us back to why this was put in place in the first place.
The fear and anxiety of not knowing, I mean, it takes us back to the AIDS crisis back in the 80s, right? Like, we don't know what's going on in the community. These groups of people, their blood is tainted. They engage in high-risk activities, and as a result, let's ban this entire group of people. And so, rightly, David, you mentioned about homophobia and transphobia, and just like being so afraid of the unknown that it was highly discriminatory to pick a group of people and say, no, not you. Just because you're part of that community, just because you identify as gay or you're a man who has sex with men, no, not you, not your blood. And that's just, in my opinion, cherry picking and just highly discriminatory is what I think it is. Yeah.
David, to you, what would removing the ban mean for removing the stigma surrounding gay men and HIV?
Well, I think it's hard to know exactly, because I think, quite frankly, the stigma of homophobia runs deeper than I think a lot of Canada wants to admit. I think this is one step, but as I mentioned earlier, I think there's work on the part of CBS. If you think about things like what institutions like police departments or other kinds of academic institutions, government institutions have had to do to repair a relationship of, really kind of castigating and discriminatory behavior, as Pranay has mentioned, against a particular group. That work still has to be done. I can tell you, each time there has been a change in this policy, I have made the drastic mistake of looking online at comments that people write about this news. And you would be shocked. I think most people would be shocked at the kind of homophobia that gets stated as people think about the possibility of having gay blood in their body. It reminds me of Archie Bunker from All in the Family back in the 70s, when he got blood donation from a black woman and was just kind of freaked out. There's still that kind of fear and stigma. I am hoping, and I know that there are good people at CBS, there are great people at CBS, quite frankly, who really want to figure out how to engage in that relationship with the queer communities across Canada, and there's work to be done. And it's their work, it's not our work, and we're looking forward to helping them think about how to do that.
We'll have to leave it there and see what happens next. Pranay Anand, David Brennan, thank you both so much for your input tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Thanks.